everyone, welcome to yet another day in the Clown Decade, the decade where things are only going to get worse before they get better. And today we are going to be doing yet another reply video to Novara Media, because, let's be honest here, Novara Media is really more up and coming than ever. Not only have the big names of Novara Media been on TV and many channels over the past few years, but they are getting even more invites than ever. Aaron Bastani was even on GB News a few times over the past few weeks. So they are a good source to take seriously, because with Corbynism gone, it will be these type of people, or at least people who listen to Novara Media, who will be the left wing in the coming years. So we may as well look at their arguments as early as we can, and debunk them as early as we can. So that's exactly what we're going to do here. And for today's video it is called How the Tories Will Stop You Protesting, and I have no doubt in my mind this is all about the bourgeoisie middle-class revolutionaries who are currently in the process of being arrested and either being given ridiculously lenient punishments such as community service and suspended sentences for locking down entire cities, or in the very rare case they are given sentences that these commies say are far too harsh, such as 3 years for the two people who locked down Dartmouth Bridge for 40 hours and caused disruption to tens of thousands of people. If you ask me, that's very fair, but I will let Novara Media take it away.
The Tories are still doing their best to drag the country further into a waking nightmare.
I agree, they are doing absolutely nothing about the NIMBYs that have taken over pretty much every council in the country. They are rising taxes to unprecedented levels, and immigration is at an all-time high, with next year the projection to be net migration somewhere between 700,000 and 1 million.
They have now successfully passed another piece of rights restricting legislation in the form of the Public Order Bill.
Oh, this was one that was put in by Priti Patel. Looks like her time in the Home Office wasn't completely wasted after all, although I do wish she bullied more people while she was in there. According to the Parliament website, it is a bill to make provision for new offences relating to public order, to make provisions about stop and search powers, to make provision about exercise police functions relating to public order, to make provision about proceedings by the Secretary of State relating to protest-related activities, to make provision about serious disruption prevention orders, and for connected purposes. In other words, they are rolling into stopping kids stabbing each other in London and stopping London being locked down by middle-class bourgeoisie revolutionaries, all in one bill. Now, I could go through this bill myself and critique it myself, but we are here to see what Novara Media think of it and to tell them why they are wrong.
And if you need a reminder, this is a set of laws intended to mop up all of the nastiest amendments cut from the 2022 Police, Crime, Sentencing and Courts Act. Cracks down on protest and public disruption.
I.e. the parts of that bill that were supposed to be put through to stop Just Stop Oil from shutting down cities, which has a lot of support from people who live in cities, and probably the countryside too, because people in rural areas are not going to want people who are fed up with not being able to get around their city moving to their rural areas.
As you can imagine, that is a very vague and subjective term with plenty of room for interpretation and abuse of power.
I mean, a thing that I have noticed with UK law over the years of doing YouTube is that pretty much every single one of them are pretty much down to interpretation. This is why barristers and solicitors seem to get so much money. It's because they're essentially hired to interpret the badly worded laws we seem to have amalgamated since the 80s. So I'm not saying this isn't a problem, but I am saying that this is a problem with the law as it works in general. But when it comes to public disruption and reasons to stop and search, they seem pretty clear-cut from what I've seen in the past. But I will allow Moya to put her case forward.
Just how the current crop of Tories like it. The House of Lords managed to remove some of the most draconian amendments to the bill, including police powers to preemptively restrict protests if they predict, by Mystic Meg powers, that they will become disrupted later down the line.
I love how she makes it out that you can't predict the future in any way. Extinction Rebellion Handbook, I have a video on it, I've gone through it. That book fully encourages people to be as disruptive as they can, peacefully. There is no reason not to preemptively stop Extinction Rebellion protests when they are encouraged to be massively disruptive. And the same goes for Just Stop Oil and for Animal Rebellion. Both have the same philosophy of we need to disrupt as many people's lives as possible to make sure that they are listening to us and to basically annoy them into our positions. That is what they are trying to do. They are incredibly open about it. Roger Hallam, who is a co-founder of Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, has his own podcast from prison at the moment, calling it the Works of the Revolution or something like that. He wants a disruptive revolution. So obviously if Just Stop Oil or Extinction Rebellion have planned protests, yes, it doesn't take a soothsayer to point out that they are going to be massively disruptive when they are open about being massively disruptive.
But here is some of what remains in the final form of the Public Order Bill, which may as well just be called the Anti-Just Stop Oil Bill.
Man, the group that is massively disrupting City, that the law seems to be doing absolutely nothing about so far, is the target of this new law. Really? Colour me shocked. I would not have expected that.
Some key points. It creates a new offence of interfering with key national infrastructure like airports or railways, carrying a maximum 12-month jail sentence or an unlimited fine, or both.
Yep, seems completely reasonable to me. Though, to be fair, it probably already is a law. It's just, again, the government looking like they're doing something, but they have absolutely no control over the College of Policing, who really sets the rules for how the police work, and they just don't seem to be enforcing the Highways Act of the 80s, or... Well, I'd be incredibly surprised if there wasn't already a law that stops people from interfering by going on the rail lines and going onto airport runways. But this is how nuts the UK legal system is at the moment. It's just keep adding laws to make it look like the government's doing something. That seems to be it. But whichever way these people are punished, they deserve to be punished for mass disruption of natural infrastructure, such as railways and airports.
Carries an offence for locking on, which is attaching yourself to buildings or objects, which now comes with a maximum 6-month jail sentence, an unlimited fine, or both.
Again, I'm okay with that, but I wish we were a bit more like the French and would just basically rip their hands off, and if it's painful for them, then, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. But I suppose that allows the police to be sued, so they don't particularly want to do that, but at least you can be directly punished for gluing yourself to stuff now.
Police are equipped with new suspicionless stop and search powers.
Suspicionless stop and search powers, I can understand why anyone would be against that. I'd need to really see what the details of the law actually say, because this is Novara Media's own key points of the Public Order Bill, and for all I know, they could have misrepresented it. But there could be suspicionless stop and search powers, and this could be quite similar to a police power of disturbing the peace, which is essentially just a way to move people from one area to another if the police think it's necessary, such as to get someone out of danger who is being an idiot. Such as the man who was shouting nonce at Prince Andrew during the Queen's funeral procession in Edinburgh. Though how exactly that would work with stop and search, I don't know, but honestly the idea of police just randomly stopping and searching people for no suspicion whatsoever, yeah, I agree. That doesn't ring good to me. But from what you said, it sounds like the Lords have amended that bit anyway, so that's surely a good thing. Thank God for the unelected chamber, I hear Novara Media scream.
And serious disruption prevention orders, which restrict being in a certain place for those labelled as likely to cause serious disruption.
That just sounds like a new version of the ASBO, and it might go the same way as the ASBO, where a lot of people started trying to get them as much as they could because it was more of a badge of honour. And yes, I can imagine the middle class wanting to do that. Oh, look, I'm a revolutionary. I got an SDPO, meaning I'm not allowed in the City of London anymore. Isn't that great? They will literally end up like this moron from Just Stop Oil, who was banned from going to London for spraying paint all over Scotland Yard.
Oh, right, can I just say, the fossil fuel funded Tufton Street has destroyed our democracy. We are here to demand a general election.
Confirmed not to be within 25 issued by Central London Magistrate.
Do you know what? You've been... Yeah, because I'm not allowed into London anymore. But I said I'm not going to commit any crime anymore, but it's freedom of speech. Yeah. This is the disgusting public order bill that's trying to take away freedom of speech.
Yes, the fake cries of freedom of speech for people who are facing the consequences of their actions of spray painting the whole of Scotland Yard orange. But yes, she will be wearing that as a badge of honour from now on because she was banned from going into London for a few weeks. Because, yes, this is a person who is probably going to try and do the same thing again because they genuinely believe they're saving the planet. Anyway, back to Novara Media.
If that sounds bad to you, you are not alone. Even Tory MPs spoke out against the new powers for police. Here's David Davis in the Commons on Monday.
I find myself, I'm afraid, in agreement with the opposition spokesman. I also support the the Casey recommendations, based as they were on a horrifying report about the behaviour of the Met over the years.
Hang on a minute, the Casey report doesn't have anything to do with these laws. The context for this clip just isn't here in this Novara media piece, but luckily, because I'm kept up on all this stuff, I know what the Casey report is, and it was the report into the Metropolitan Police post the kidnap, rape and murder of Sarah Everard by a serving Met police officer. The investigation basically found that the police don't self-report one another for horrific things that they do. They even have banter about it. And that basically, because the Met police are so useless at their jobs, and because of all these terrible news stories that seem to come out daily about the Met police, either not doing their jobs very well or just being outright terrible human beings, that there's no public trust in the Met police and that they seem to have very low standards. But I don't see what a UK-wide law has to do with specifically just the Met police, apart from the fact that they're going to be enforcing these laws the most, because obviously the biggest target is London.
And let's be clear, no government of any persuasion has actually managed to get the Met to behave, and not just the Met, other police forces too, in a manner which is acceptable to the public.
Yeah, I don't know who the editor or producer of this video is, but they have completely screwed this bit up. He is definitely just talking about the Metropolitan Police, and he is not saying that this law should not be enforced. I really wish Novara Media would put their links in their video to what they're sourcing, like I always do, because it makes it a lot easier for me to actually go and find these things and find out how they got this so wrong, and that I can do my own research into what they're saying, because I really want that for people watching my videos. I want people to prove me wrong. But obviously Novara Media don't have time for that, and they just want to assert something that is patently untrue, even in their own video. I don't know why they kept this clip in.
The second point I would make very quickly is that when the Home Secretary in 2010, Theresa May, for those who don't remember, limited stop and search, she did not do so out of an excess of liberal sympathy. She did so because at that point in time, stop and search was being used in such a way that it caused serious problems, race relations problems, in several parts of the country.
Now, this might be the part where they're talking about this law specifically, and honestly, when it comes to the history of stop and search, as far as I'm aware, when Priti Patel brought it back when she was Home Secretary, you would notice a drop in knife crime starting to occur as stop and searches start to be reintroduced into the Metropolitan Police. Now, politics is always about a game of give and take, and believe it or not, I am more on the side of let's have less stabbings and slightly worse race relations than let's have slightly better race relations but more stabbings. Anyway, it quickly explains that stop and search appeared to be targeted in areas where knife crime was quite high, which happened to be minority areas in London. And the minority communities, you know, some understood why it was there and some found it racist, but obviously Theresa May went, no, we're not having it anymore. But then he finally gets into the part about the new public order bill. So Novara Media have effectively wasted about a minute of everyone's time when they could have just summed this bit up in about 10 seconds, and then played this clip.
That is an order of magnitude different from using suspicionless stop and search for controlling demonstrations.
I mean, I will admit, the use of the word suspicionless is incredibly bad. Yet from the way it's just been described there in that small clip by David Davis, it doesn't actually sound suspicionless, since he says at the end it is to control demonstrations. So, to my mind, since it is the Just Stop Oil Prevention Bill, it's probably going to be used in a suspicionless manner to stop and search people for things like superglue or hammers that they've used to stick themselves to roads and to break windows. And if that prevents crime, I'm kind of on the side of, well, good, but don't get me wrong, I can understand how this may be abused. So I've gone a step further and actually gone to the root of this stop and search power, and here's what the government's website has to say. So, extending stop and search powers for police to search and seize objects such as lock-on devices, i.e. superglue, that may be used in the commission of a protest-related offence. So this measure will enable the police to proactively tackle highly disruptive protesters intent on committing an offence by searching them for seizing items which are made, adapted or intended to be used in connection with a protest-related offence. The bill provides for both suspicion-led power, amending Section 1 of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act 1984, and suspicionless power, Suspicion-led stop and search is where a police officer reasonably suspects that a person is carrying out an object that is made or intended for use in connection with a protest-related offence. When the suspicionless stop and search power has been authorised, it will allow a constable to conduct a stop and search without the need for suspicion. The power can be used when a police officer of or above the rank of inspector gives an authorisation for the use in a specific locality for a specific period. So it's not a blanket case of literally anywhere in London you can be stopped and searched for no reason whatsoever. There is a specific area where it will be authorised for a specific period. That is where the checks and balances for this suspicionless stop and search power comes in, which is a hell of a lot better than Novara media has made it sound. And in fact, it's not the first time something like this has been used. The suspicionless stop and search powers uses a similar framework to that found within Section 60 of the Criminal Justice and Public Order Act 1994 to ensure consistency in terms of police powers and safeguards. In other words, we have a framework for how this can be abused and how the government can punish any police force that abuses its power. As I say, this is a hell of a lot better than it was made out to be.
Davis's objections are being backed by a pretty significant ally, the UN.
The UN's been a joke since the 90s. Don't get me started on that.
Order! Do you kids want to be like the real UN? Or do you just want to squabble and waste time?
Here is a press release the organisation dropped today. UN Human Rights Chief urges UK to reverse deeply troubling public order bill.
Well, of course they did. The UN has nothing better to do than to tell countries in the West to stop enforcing their own laws. Oh, ordinary people in your capital city can't get to work half the months of summer? Well, you can't do anything to stop that. Yeah, man, great international body you've got there.
Volker Turk, the UN Human Rights Commissioner, does not mince his words. Turk said, "This new law imposes serious and undue restrictions on these rights that are neither necessary nor proportionate to achieve a legitimate purpose as defined under international law."
You do have to laugh at the UN since they are focusing on allowing a city to function most of the time in the UK, and then you compare it to problems that the rest of the world has with free speech, and you just have to laugh. A freedom index is still ridiculously high even when these laws come into power. Your right to protest does not give you the right to shut down an entire city. That is just ridiculous.
This law is wholly unnecessary, as UK police already have the powers to act against violent and disruptive demonstration. It's especially worrying that the law expands the powers of the police to stop and search individuals, including without suspicion, defines some of the new criminal offences in a vague and overly broad manner, and imposes unnecessary and disproportionate criminal sanctions on people organising or taking part in peaceful protests.
That's the thing, though. Even people that are smashing up windows and covering areas in paint, which comes under criminal damage, are getting barely any jail time or any fines. And yes, as mentioned before, we have hundreds of thousands of laws that are wholly unnecessary because things are already illegal, but as I say, it's just the government looking like they're doing something most of the time. I mean, for example, Labour are constantly saying, we will make drink spiking illegal. It's already illegal. Yet you will probably never find the UN complaining about all the other times that's happened. Just this one time, because saving the planet is one of the UN's prime directive, and this law is obviously to try and stop Just Stop Oil's ridiculously disruptive practices, which, by the way, is probably a very popular thing with the voters, but we'll get into that later. Because believe it or not, the public tend to like when the police do their job and allow people to get along with their lawful business peacefully.
Now, Turk saved particular attention for serious disruption prevention orders, adding, "The grave risk here is that these orders preemptively limit someone's future legitimate exercise of their rights. I'm also concerned that the law appears to target in particular peaceful actions used by those protesting about human rights and environmental issues."
Well, yes, this is the thing. The laws we already have are to stop violent protests, but as I say, even the violent protests are not being punished. But when it comes to non-violent protests, there is still very good reason to suppress these disruptions because there may be no physical damage there, but as plenty of people who are interviewed have said, they get economically damaged because they can't get to their jobs, they won't get paid if they're not at their jobs, and especially with, say, delivery drivers, couriers, or people just commuting to hourly work, you'll find that they get economically damaged. And these selfish, quote-unquote peaceful protesters do not give a fig about that. So as far as I'm concerned, I don't really give a fig if they all end up in jail. Because if your only way of protesting is to shut down everyone else's lawful business, then quite frankly that is the only place you deserve. That or the stocks, but apparently we're not allowed to do that.
As the world faces the triple planetary crisis of climate change, loss of biodiversity, and pollution, governments should be protecting and facilitating peaceful protests on such existential topics, not hindering and blocking them.
Yeah, well, that last paragraph just gave it all away, didn't it? He's got no interest in actually allowing for peaceful protests of any kind. It is simply the kind that is in favour of the things that the UN are, well, have got pet projects in and spend billions and billions of pounds on, although they do absolutely nothing about China and India polluting half of the ocean. It's the old, they're doing some high status stuff, and we are a high status institution, therefore we need to defend them wherever we can. There's no principle here, it's just, oh, it's a climate change thing, right, we're on their side then.
Now, he finished that by asking the UK government to, quote, reverse the legislation as soon as feasible.
Well, I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. We're currently in progress with the Royal Assent. This has gone through both the House of Commons and the House of Lords. This, for all intents and purposes, is a perfectly legitimate and enforceable law, as Parliament is sovereign, and it has been given Royal Assent, or will be given Royal Assent shortly. In other words, the UN can do one.
Given that Home Secretary Suella Braverman was on Nick Ferrari's LBC show on Wednesday slamming environmental protesters as eco-zealots and championing the public order bill, that seems unlikely.
Also, yes, and, as useless as a lot of recent Home Secretaries have been, I have enjoyed the last two being quite vocal on saying to all these high-status morons, up yours. Unfortunately, that also will lead to them being called out, quote-unquote, for bullying by civil servants, because civil servants have got a tight grip around the neck of any minister who happens to go in these departments.
Now, here is what she said.
What is your instruction to police officers if they see the highways being blocked in this fashion?
I think it all depends on individual circumstances. And the issue with these militant protesters is one that I know many of your listeners and indeed myself are incredibly frustrated.
Yeah, it's quite common to just ask pretty much anyone in public what they think of Just Stop Oil and Extinction Rebellion, and generally the people around the UK are not particularly happy with them, because the people of the UK do not like other people making their own lives harder for pretty much any reason, but especially if it's just for their pet project.
These eco-zealots are selfish, they are disruptive, they're causing misery.
Yeah, I mean, all those things are true, and I think calling them eco-zealots is fair and reasonable, because it is almost a religious cult. There's very limited scientific backing behind what they're saying, and if you ever see the videos of them getting into arguments, you'll see that they don't really have anything reasonable to say. Just a bunch of platitudes and repeating of talking points they heard from their almighty master Roger Hallam, or whichever environmental zealots they happen to be listening to most recently.
If they're causing a level of disruption which is serious, which meets the criminal threshold, then the police must definitely intervene and arrest. We have seen, incidentally, over recent years, thousands of, approximately 1,000 arrests being made, hundreds of convictions. In fact, last week we saw, or very recently, one such arrest leading to a custodial sentence for one of the protesters who was hanging from the gantries on
Indeed,
the Dartford
if I
tunnel.
take...
Yeah, and more of that, please. I believe, as I said at the start of the video, those two got about 3 years each, which for 40 hours of disruption, causing tens of thousands of people to not go around their lawful business, I'd say that yes, that is pretty fair. Doesn't matter what you're protesting, if you are being selfish like that and not allowing people to live their lives as they see fit, then yes, you do deserve jail time. So the rest of that interview is just Nick Ferrari asking Suella Braverman would he be arrested if he walked at a snail's pace in front of traffic when doing one of these protests, and Suella Braverman gave a pretty politician answer of just saying, well, if it comes above the criminal threshold, then yes. And that's the new public order bill that it's going to soon become an act, will allow for the arrest of anyone who is part of that protest for, believe it or not, breaking the law and causing disruption. All seems fine to me. So, back to Moya.
Now, even without the public order bill, environmental protesters are still being hit with the full whack of the law at the moment.
Good, excellent. I think we need more of these white pills.
In October last year, 2 Just Stop Oil protesters shut down the Dartford crossing. It was out of operation for just under 48 hours.
Yeah, it was only 2 days. It was just 2 days. What's the issue? The issue is that the Dartford crossing is a major bridge over the River Thames and is the only fixed crossing on the River Thames that is east of Greater London, i.e., it is a major arterial road. If that is closed, that creates an incredibly large amount of disruption. It is the busiest river crossing in the United Kingdom, and its average daily use is about 130,000 vehicles. Of course, if you shut that down for 2 days, that's 260,000 vehicles. Of course, you're going to get arrested and have the full hammer of the law coming down on you. You effectively have brought East London to a standstill.
And last week, they were sentenced to more than 2.5 years in prison.
Quite frankly, from what I've just read on Wikipedia, I think that's too lenient.
Now, 34-year-old Marcus Decker received 2 years and 7 months in prison, while 40-year-old Morgan Trowland was given 3 years. The judge in their case said they had to be, quote, punished for causing chaos and in order to deter copycats.
Well, yeah, that's what a justice system's for. The laws are in place, right? They are there for judges to then give out sentences or punishments to people who break these laws, which in turn is a deterrent to stop people from breaking the laws in the first place. It is how we get a society working. You might be surprised to find out that every country in the world has been running on a system similar to this since the dawn of time. So it is not unreasonable for a judge to say, yes, I am doing this to punish you for breaking a law, because that's the point in the judicial system, and it will also deter other people from doing a copycat protest, which is another point of the law. Yet Moya is Pikachu facing here because punishing people is a bad thing or something. Oh, people only commit crimes because, they have unmet needs or they're poor, basically. Well, all these people are middle class and, quite frankly, have too much time on their hands, so that is a load of nonsense, quite clearly.
It's worth mentioning that the pair have been held on remand, meaning they've been in jail awaiting trial since October 2022, which adds about 6 extra months onto their sentences, respectively.
Again, I have absolutely no sympathy for that because, as I've said, Extinction Rebellion, which is just a proto-Just Stop Oil, part of their handbook said the whole point is that we are going to fill up the judicial system, fill up all the jails and the cells, so they have no choice but to give in to our demands. So quite frankly, if they have been in jail for 6 months awaiting this trial, yeah, they just deserve it. They knew what they were doing, they knew what they were getting into, there was no hiding any of these facts. Fine, they can have the extra 6 months. I don't care, I still think it's too lenient.
Sean, why are the government increasingly using climate protesters as their justification for this sort of rights-robbing legislation?
Because it's causing hundreds of thousands of people too much disruption, so much disruption in fact, that there is overwhelming support for it. Even YouGov, which is infamous for having a left-wing bent whenever they have any sort of survey going out, every single point of the public order bill is supported broadly by the public. The most major support, by the way, is for making it a criminal offence to obstruct major transport works, which would include the Dartmouth crossing. So in answer to your question, why are they bringing in these laws to stop disruption? The reason is because people massively support stopping disruption.
It might be that the climate movement is one of the biggest threats to state power because it is a sort of broad-based movement that includes people across generations, of course, but especially young people, but across lines of class, ethnicity, race, and it's only going to continue growing because the climate crisis is growing, and I think younger generations and right down Gen Z, even younger, are going to increasingly become angry with governments and I don't know, the older world's failings in respect of the climate crisis.
Fellow comrade communist, please tell me why the government is trying to increase its state power. Oh, communist jargon, communist jargon, communist jargon, and a bit of intersectional jargon as well. No, the answer is really simple. Why does a political party who want to be re-elected into parliament use parliament and their powers to do something that the public want? I don't know, maybe it's because they want to be re-elected. I don't understand how your brain works like this. Oh, there's intergenerational, interclass support for all this, and they are trying to divide and conquer us, actually. No, not really. You have a very unpopular group doing very unpopular things. Obviously, it's going to be popular to stop them.
So I think if you enter the mindset for a minute, which I don't really care to, but of the Tories and of Suella Braverman.
Oh my God. I mean, I'm just thinking back to The Righteous Mind by Jonathan Haidt, where he basically says at one point in the book that conservatives are very good at getting into the mindset of liberals because, or leftists at the very least, because leftists have a couple of very focused morals, and that is, fairness and safety. And conservatives actually understand that because they deem them to be moral as well. They've just got a load of other things they find moral and worthy of promoting and protecting, which leftists and liberals as well have absolutely no interest in and actually think is evil. So when Sean says, and you can see it already with her saying, I don't really want to do this, but when she says, I'm going to try and get in the mindset of the Tories, she basically thinks, what is the most evil thing I can think of? And that is what a Tory is. And that's in no doubt going to come out in this next clip.
I think what here is this idea is an attempt to dissuade people, to make it really punitive from joining these movements.
Okay, that's not actually as bad as I thought she was going to go, but there's still a bit of this clip left, so it could get much worse.
To make it something that isn't easy to do, that people have to think twice about, that you have to have that extra layer of heroism in order to be a climate activist engaged in civil disobedience. I think that's a large part of it.
I mean, to be quite honest, I'm quite surprised it's not a prescribed group already, because the disruption that they get themselves into is probably costing the government quite a few millions, if not billions of pounds for a problem that needs to be fixed every time they do something like this. I mean, they've destroyed roads in the past, for goodness sake. But if this is a soft way of making people not want to join these cults, then I am all for it, if that's a consequence of this. But I don't know why they... Well, I know the reason why they can't just say because the common people support it. It's because they have no idea what the common people want. Because unfortunately they are in a London bubble where they think the working class want to do nothing but roll in the meadows, write poetry and drink all day.
And of course, that's in the interests of the Tories and their donors, many of whom are sort of deeply enwrapped with the fossil fuel industry.
It can never be simple, can it? It's always got to be, it's actually just this big conspiracy. There's actually no support for any of this. Well, as shown, over 65% of the country are in favour of stopping these major disruptions. So, yeah, it's not just oil companies giving the Tories money that has led to this law. It is the fact that most of the people in the UK want this law in place, even with the dodgy stop and search part. 51% of the people in that poll were perfectly fine with and actually in support of extending those stop and search powers. So you've got no leg to stand on, basically. It's a popular law, and to say it's draconian is just ridiculous because, quite frankly, most of the UK sees Just Stop Oil as a draconian group, effectively because all they do is throw tantrums. Anyway, that's everything I had for you today. So as usual, thank you very much for watching, and until next time, goodbye.